And I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to share this perspective with you, because not only is it biblical and compassionate and full of grace and truth, but it's coming from over 20 years of ministry with an organization that helps people deal with unwanted homosexuality. So this is not a matter of... I've had the privilege of being at numerous weddings of people that came out of a deep in the gay lifestyle, believing, okay, well, I'll give Jesus a shot and see if he can change my heart at all. And as they followed hard after Christ and sought to become a disciple of Jesus, as opposed to being discipled by the world, TikTok, Taylor Swift, so many of the lyrics of songs, he changes people's hearts. And I've been at the weddings of people who married the opposite sex when they weren't interested in them at all. I have met the children of people who are still walking in faithfulness because the Lord changes lives. Change is possible. I'm going to talk about that again in a minute. So let's talk about grace and truth about LGBT. We start with a worldview perspective because that's what this class is. I'm not addressing the pantheistic perspective because they have no concepts of right or wrong. There's no real differences between anything, so that's off the table. But naturalism, and remind me, what is naturalism?
Basing your beliefs on what is natural?
It is about what is natural, but bigger than that. What do you think?
Is naturalism like believing there's nothing outside of like the earthly world, like just
Yeah. The physical universe, that's right. Basically, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And so God is in the category of things that you can't measure. You can't even see, so we certainly can't measure him. So naturalism, another word for it is materialism. You know, all we believe in is those things that have mass and energy. Naturalism says, in terms of homosexuality, what is okay. It has to be okay, because what is all there is. There is no right or wrong. There is no higher thinking that would say that there is a problem. Christian theism says what is has been warped by the fall. This is not the world as God created it. God created an absolutely perfect, sinless world, and then Adam and Eve made it crash and burn in Genesis 3 at the fall. So our thoughts, our bodies, our feelings have all been warped by the effect of the fall on our hearts and our minds. Naturalism says all feelings are natural. If you feel it, it's just part of reality. It's just, that's what it is. But Christian theism says LGBT feelings, when you have strong cravings, attractions for a romantic and erotic relationship with people of the same sex, that is not the way God created us to relate to each other. These are abnormal feelings. It may feel normal, but they're not according to God's standards. And as creator, he's the one who gets to determine what is normal and abnormal. As a matter of fact, in Romans 1, we come across a word basically saying these things are not natural, they're not normal, and God gets to determine that because he's the creator. Naturalism says all consensual activity is a viable choice. If you want to do it, both people are good with it, everything's fine. But Christian theism says LGBT sexual activity is sin. It's not, acting on these feelings is not God's intention for our hearts or our bodies. And naturalism says there should be no guilt for you doing what feels natural and whatever you want, but Christian theism says that acting on same-sex feelings is sin. And notice I said acting on it. But Jesus forgives sinners. So there's a huge difference in those two worldviews. In your outline, I gave you the scriptures for what the Bible says about homosexuality, because unless you know what the Bible says, you can't have a grounded perspective on it. I'm not going to go through these. Just know that these are the passages that address the issue. Some people say Jesus never talked about LGBT issues. He never addressed homosexuality. That's really not true. What he did was he went back to the original creative intent of God and how God made us to relate to each other. And he says in Matthew 19, 4-6, "Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, 'For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife,'" and there you have male and female, a man and his wife, "and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." When he said this, he was establishing the standard for sexual ethics and sexual behavior. And he said, it's one man and one woman in a committed monogamous relationship. That is God's intention. Anything outside of that is going to be sin, and that includes homosexuality. And people will say, but God made me gay. I've always felt this way. He made me gay, it must be okay. God doesn't make anyone gay. God's intention for us sexually is shown in how we are created, male and female, how the puzzle pieces fit. So, to give a grounding for understanding this issue, I am delighted to talk to you about one of my favorite things to teach on, which is the gender spectrum. If I use that term, gender spectrum, you may think of a single bandwidth that runs from male to female, from masculine to feminine, and people can slide up and down this spectrum, and so many people see it as a single spectrum, but I don't believe that that's the way God intends for us to relate to each other. What I believe God showed me years ago is that in making us male and female, Genesis 1:26, there is a separate masculinity spectrum from the femininity spectrum. And what that means is there is a lot of variation on the masculinity spectrum, just as there's a whole lot of variation with girls and women on the femininity spectrum. They do not cross, they don't overlap. There may be some similarities, but God makes all men and boys to fit on the masculinity spectrum. He makes all girls and women to fit somewhere of his choice on the femininity spectrum. So let's look first at the masculinity spectrum. On the one end are rough and tumble boys, ones who come out of the womb looking for a ball to play with and are usually very athletic, very active. If you can see it here at RHSA with the little kids. If we lined up the boys and said, go from point A to point B, they would zoom back and forth, zigzag, taking as much time and energy as they possibly can to move from one place to another. You see in the top left a little boy with a frog coming out of his mouth. That is a real frog, as far as I know, because there are rough and tumble boys who love frogs and toads and snails and snakes and that sort of thing, particularly if they can make girls scream. That's just the way they are. That's their mindset. Below that is a picture of 3 little boys in the backyard, and they have picked up weapons. Those are tree limbs and branches of one kind or another. And rough and tumble boys are just made for competition and warfare and fighting and tussling and being very physical with each other. When, before we had children, I was reading an article in a magazine by a mom who decided she did not want any guns in her house. It was going to be a gun-free zone. And she didn't want any weapons of any kind in her house. And so, wanted to check, okay. She decided, no guns, I'm going to be raising peaceful, gun-hating boys who will be like their mom, who hates guns. Then she had two little boys, and one morning at breakfast, she discovered one of her sons took his piece of toast and he nibbled it into the shape of a pistol. And so he picked it up and he was pretending to shoot his brother. It's like, wow, this is not what I had in mind. The other brother, when they went through the McDonald's drive-thru, got his Happy Meal, and he went and found the longest French fry in his Happy Meal, and he picked it up and it was a mini machine gun toward his brother, and she's like, I can't get away with it. And she realized, she can't get away from this, and she realized some boys just have a truck and gun gene. You know, they're just drawn to weaponry. They're drawn to fighting, and I need to stop fighting against it. And I was very glad that I read that article before I had two sons, because they both loved weapons and fighting and jostling with each other, and it's just the way God made them. So this is the vast majority of boys and men. They grow up to be men who continue to be this way, are on the rough and tumble end. But on the other end of the masculinity spectrum are the sensitive, artistic, creative boys. That God also makes them just the way He wanted them. He plans for them to be sensitive, artistic, and creative. So you see in the top right is a little boy wearing his sister's skirt. And it's not because he wants to be a girl, it's because he's bored with boy colors like gray and dark blue and dark green and brown and black. And he likes bright colors, especially if you twirl around, it makes really cool patterns, because he's an artist and he wants lots of life and activity and color and patterns. And so he put on his sister's skirt because he loved the colors. On the bottom picture, you see boys at a ballet bar. And these are representative of boys who were gifted in the performing arts, musical arts, the drawing and painting, that kind of art. And these boys are also created by God with those strengths, because if all boys were rough and tumble, all buildings, for example, would be boxes. There wouldn't be architects making beautiful buildings, and would all be utilitarian. We need boys and men who are gifted with aesthetics. Others are gifted with athletics. They're the athletes, but we also need ones who love beauty and bring that into the world. These sensitive boys are a lot like girls, although they doesn't mean that they're girly, in that they make connections with people and they love to sit across from each other and see what's going on in somebody's face and their nonverbal cues. And they tend to be very sensitive. And when these boys are supported in the kind of masculine that God made them to be, they end up being the most amazing fathers and counselors and teachers, and can be great coaches, pastors, and they are a special gift to the world. But the vast majority of boys are the rough and tumble or somewhere toward the middle, and they look down on the minority of sensitive, artistic, creative boys, and they can bully them and tell them they're not good enough boys, there's something wrong with them. And that's easy for that to happen because the sensitive boys often don't have real good eye-hand coordination, and so they're not real good at athletics. Now, they may be wonderful at running, which is, you know, it's just your own body, swimming, something that's not contact sports, but often they don't want to have anything to do with sports, and the boys on the other end of the spectrum say, that's not okay. You have to be like us in order for you to be acceptable. And so the sensitive, artistic, creative ones feel like they don't belong. They don't belong in the world of boys. They don't belong in the world of men. And they can easily feel disconnected from other males, and things get twisted inside. These are the kind of boys that come to Living Hope ministry that I work with, seeking help for unwanted same-sex attraction. Let me ask, on the masculinity spectrum, where would you put Jesus? What kind of boy, man, do you think he was? Where does he go on that spectrum? What do you think, Cole?
I mean, I would say probably in the middle, but maybe a little bit closer to sensitive.
That's a good place to start. Balanced, right? I would suggest he's the whole thing all at once, because he embodies every strength of masculinity that God makes. He would have embodied, and still does, you know, the rough and tumble, get out there and get her done, go fight wars and battles, and when there's a problem, step up and solve it. The rough and tumble boys, that's I'm sure that's the kind of boy that he was. But was he sensitive? Was he artistic? Was he creative? Have you ever seen a sunrise or a sunset? Jesus paints those with his sky colors. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why we shouldn't get all caught up in the culture of color, because there are people say, well, pink is for girls and blue is for boys, which, by the way, it was flipped before about 1950. But when I find a boy who loves pink and purple, and I just say, Jesus loves pink and purple too. It doesn't make him girly. It means he loves beautiful colors. Sunrises are full of pinks and purples. And so I would suggest that Jesus filled the whole masculinity spectrum. As a matter of fact, I've been an observer of people for a very long time, and what I see is that the more that a young man becomes more and more like Christ as he grows spiritually, he starts taking up more bandwidth on the masculinity spectrum. The rough and tumble guys become more sensitive, more creative. The sensitive guys start stressing themselves to grow outside of their comfort zone and try to do things that maybe they were afraid of. I have two sons. One of them would put himself in the middle of the masculinity spectrum. My younger son has always been an artist, and when he was in about 5th grade, he came and flopped himself in a chair in the living room with me and goes, "Mom, I'm such a girl," which wasn't a good thing in his mind. And I said, "Why? What are you thinking?" He goes, "'Cause I cry so easily." And I said, "Sweetie, you are not a girl. You are a young man with a gentle, tender, sensitive heart. And there's going to be some girl, when she meets you, she's going to feel like she hit the jackpot." And that's exactly what happened. Her name is Lauren. Today is their 19th anniversary, and she thinks she hit the jackpot. He ended up with getting a degree in art education, but he was also not happy with being just on that end of the spectrum. And so he decided, since he was a soccer player and he was afraid of soccer balls coming at him, he asked us to let him go to a goalie camp, because you got to go after those balls and not be afraid of them coming after you. He wanted to stretch himself and attack the fear that he had. And as he pushed himself toward the other end of the spectrum, he just became a fuller young man. And he's very balanced to this day, and it's a beautiful thing to see. So let me go to the femininity spectrum. On one end, you've got girly girls. They come out of the womb looking for a little pink headband on their little bald head with a great big flower on it. They want the girly colored receiving blankets and can't wait to wear a tutu, and can't wait for her fingernails and toenails to get big enough for mommy to paint. And they often they love to play with dolls and stuffed animals, and can gravitate toward mothering kind of responses and behaviors. On the other end of the spectrum are tomboys, and these tomboy jockettes who are gifted athletes. They're so good at different sports. They're often natural leaders, and they have no patience for the girly girl stuff. They don't want to wear dresses. They don't want to be all foo-fooed up like that. Now, let me be comfortable. Let me be in my jeans or my sweats and put my baseball cap on backwards. And they, too, like the sensitive boys, they are in the minority, and they get bullied by the girly girls. But they're also tender-hearted and sensitive. And it's real easy for the girly girls not to realize that, because they may look more like boyish, more masculine, and what's comfortable for them, but they have tender hearts. Yes, sir?
How would they get picked on more if like they're more rough or like?
They get picked on because the girly girls say, you're not a good enough kind of girl. You're not like us.
They
There's
use
something.
words to pick on them.
Well, they do use words to, you're a lesbian, you're queer, you're gay, but they also can get physical. I literally have a friend that when she was somewhere around 10, on the way home from school one day, she literally got jumped on by a group of girly girls who said, you're not a good enough girl. There's something wrong with you. And they wrestled her to the ground. They sat on top of her, and somehow they had some makeup with them. What 10-year-olds were doing with makeup, I don't know. This was a long time ago. And they put it on her face, which she absolutely hated. But they literally physically bullied her and said, you're not like us. There's something wrong with you. And that's what it comes down to. Great question. By the way, some progressive-minded parents don't want there to be any stereotypes with their kids. And I know of one mom who said, well, we have a little girl, but we don't want her to be a girly girl or, just any kind of stereotypical girl. So they didn't buy her dolls. They didn't buy her stuffed animals. What they did was they bought her cars and trucks and said, these are your toys. And one day, Mom was going past the little girls, she was still a toddler, going past her room at nap time. And she went in and she had lined up all the cars and the trucks in a row, and she got a little blanket and laid it on them and kissed them night-night before their naps. And she was being very much a mother to her cars and trucks. She didn't have any dolls. She didn't have any stuffed animals. So she loved on her cars and trucks. It's like, kids are born the way that God wants them to be. And this was a very maternal little girl who only had cars and trucks to play with. But one of the things about the femininity spectrum that I've noticed over the years is that as a girl starts becoming more and more of a disciple of Jesus and starts following hard after him and developing intimacy with him, she starts growing, taking up more space on the femininity spectrum as well, and starts becoming stronger in many ways. I love, for example, when I'm talking to tomboy girls who grow up to be tomboy moms. There are plenty of them in this building right now who are great moms of boys, and they become great Cub Scout leaders and teachers and that kind of thing. But I love getting a chance to introduce girls who want to fight. They like the idea of getting physical and getting out there and showing the boys how to throw a perfect spiral and that kind of thing. Love being able to introduce them to spiritual warfare, because when the Bible talks about the need to fight back against evil, against the enemy, and get involved in warfare in Ephesians 6, there's no genders involved. We are all called to be warriors. And so some women can be warrior princesses and others can be princess warriors, but we need to go to war. And that works really well for the tomboy girls. The reason I spend so much time talking about the gender spectrum is because it's very helpful to know that God delights to make a variety of girls and a variety of boys, and we need to celebrate however God chooses what kind of boy, what kind of girl God chooses us to be. And when parents hear this, they realize, oh, I don't have to try to make my sensitive son into some sort of hunter and fisher and archer guy. Let's celebrate the kind of boy that he is. Let parents celebrate the kind of girl that their daughters are. And when we can celebrate and accept that God makes kids different, he makes men and women different, then we don't have to stumble over the stereotypes that are so much of a problem with gender issues and gender insecurities, which is where I want to go next in terms of explaining why do some people not feel comfortable with the kind of boy, the kind of girl, kind of man, the kind of woman that they are. And it starts with the fact that God gives us all needs for the 3 A's: attention, approval, and affection. Every person needs to receive those 3 affirmations, those 3 ways of feeling like I matter and I'm being taken care of. The problem comes when those needs don't get met. So keep this idea of unmet needs in the back of your mind as I explain that God's plan for babies is that we connect first with mom, who is the one that carries us for 9 months, and then God equips mothers after they give birth to be able to feed their children.
Omar?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. See you later. God equips mothers to feed their children milk that they need, and that's a very close relationship. As a matter of fact, what they've discovered is that a baby's eyes focus on the mother's face, particularly her eyes, at the exact right distance between the baby's eyes and the mother's eyes for the baby to just kind of fixate on mom's eyes, and it makes them feel like, oh, I'm connected to mommy, I matter. And what they've discovered is that if you just give a baby a bottle but they don't get held, they have failure to thrive. They need that strong connection with mom first. That's the bottom layer. And then a little bit later, when the baby goes from a child goes from baby to toddler, hopefully there's another adult around who's not like the mom, He's bigger and taller, has a deeper voice. He's kind of rougher, and he parents differently than the mom. And God intends for after we have this first connection with mom, that then there's a second stage of connecting with dad. And we get different ways of receiving attention, approval, and affection, first from mom and then from dad. Then, between ages 4 and 10, kids start connecting with their same-sex peers. So boys look for other boys to play with, girls look for other girls to play with. And then finally, in adolescence, we start connecting with opposite-sex peers. It's in that order, and if our needs, our emotional needs, are not met, and it leaves a hole in the heart, it sets people up for not relating well to themselves and other people. So the problem is when you have a hole in your heart because if you've got unmet needs, at adolescence there's a 600% increase in the sex hormones in the body. And when you have unmet needs that meet up with sex hormones, these unmet needs get sexualized, and people find themselves drawn to others that they hope, it's kind of like, maybe I can stuff you into this hole in my heart, missing my mom or missing my dad. Or there are lots of people who had a healthy relationship with their mom and their dad, but they were military or they were missionaries, and they didn't connect with other kids their same sex. The boys didn't find other boys to play with. The girls didn't find other girls to be close, good friends with. And there's this longing for a best friend. And you can have that hole in the heart that gets sexualized at puberty. I've seen that one happen over and over again. So if there's unmet needs, we need to finish growing up and get those needs met someplace other than where they were supposed to be met. And that's one of the things I love about the church, is that it's God's do-over family. We can find people to be like a mother to us or like a father to us. And we can, if we've missed out on making friends, hopefully in the church you can find other people to be friends with you and fill that hole in your heart, which is one of the reasons why I just beg you to be aware of people who are marginalized, people who are on the fringes of school or church or the neighborhood or whatever, and be inclusive. Bring them in and say, hey, you want to have lunch with me? Sit with me, come join us. People need to feel like they belong. And that's one of the ways that people's holes in their hearts can get met. So we need to embrace the kind of boy or girl that God makes us to be, rather than react against gender stereotypes. That's a big problem, particularly as we get into the whole subject of transgender, which we'll do next semester. So much of the problem with same-sex attraction has to do with gender stereotypes, so we need to just flick them away and go, God makes lots of different people in different ways. Nobody is locked in a box of what we should be according to stereotypes. Let's get rid of the stereotypes. So I want to walk you through several lies that you hear in the culture about homosexuality. The first lie is that homosexuality is normal and healthy and it should be celebrated. It's just part of a totally normal sexual variation. But the truth is, it is neither normal. We see that in Romans 1. It's not normal because all you have to do is look at the male and female body parts to see that 2 males and 2 females don't fit together. It's like puzzle pieces, they don't fit. It's not normal. And it's also not healthy. the fact that it occurs, until recently, it was only 2 to 3% of the population. No matter where you went in the world, the fact that it occurs doesn't make it normal. The fact that it occurs means we live in a fallen world where things go wrong. But the number of young people, Gen Z and younger, claiming or taking on a gay or lesbian identity has skyrocketed in the last 15 years or so. So much of it is because of social media, where people are we're pushing it on others. You know, yeah, I know you're gay. We can see that. You know, you're lesbian. We can see that. It's and people go, well, I didn't think that I was, but maybe they're right. And people start believing each other. So the number of those claiming a gay identity has gone up. It doesn't make it normal or healthy. It means that there is a social contagion. They're hearing that from other people. If we look at the biology and the psychology of male-female relationships, we can see that it's not normal or healthy. As I said, about the body parts don't fit with two of the same gender, but also in the psychology. Guys and girls are gifted in different strengths, and they have different weaknesses that complement each other. And when you have two people of the same sex in a close, intimate, erotic, romantic relationship, you have too much of some things and not enough of others. And there's no balance there. There's no complementary nature to a guy and a girl balancing each other out, which is why same-sex relationships are full of drama, and some of them are full of violence because it's completely unbalanced. When people feel like, oh I'm really drawn to the same sex, what's wise is to see that like the red light on the dashboard of a car. There's something saying there's something wrong. You need to look under the hood and find out what's going on. Acting on same-sex attractions isn't healthy either emotionally or physically. Those who do are at far greater risk for sexually transmitted diseases, including AIDS, far greater risk for alcoholism and drug abuse, because there's mental health issues that often people will try to medicate themselves through alcohol and drugs. Much higher incidence of depression and anxiety because they're not feeling good about themselves, and they don't feel good about their relationship with other people. The relationships between people, same-sex couples, are emotionally exhausting because it's not the natural complementarity is missing. The way that God intended for males and females to relate to each other is missing, and so it's exhausting to try to force too much sameness together. Particularly in men, those that act out on their same-sex attractions have a shortened lifespan because male gay sex is very, very unhealthy, and it introduces all kinds of pathogens into the body. And so those that dive hard into the gay lifestyle, and it is a lifestyle in some areas, tend to die sooner. They get sicker sooner, and they tend to die sooner. I have a friend who was a lesbian activist for 25 years before she became a Christian, and one of the things I learned from her is that lesbian identifying women have a much higher rate of cancer risk because they're not getting married and having babies, and so their bodies are not fulfilling what God ordains for most women is to get pregnant, have babies, and nurse, and it has a reaction in their bodies, and they have a higher risk of different kinds of female-related cancers because their bodies are not fulfilling what most women are meant for. The second lie you see in the culture is that if you experience same-sex attraction, that automatically means you're a gay or lesbian. It's not true. When you have unmet, legitimate needs that God gave every human being, the 3 A's, attention, affection, and approval, or affirmation, if you have unmet needs, it means you have unmet needs. It doesn't mean you're gay or lesbian. It means you need to find ways to meet them. And crushes on other people are normal. But you don't hear this in the culture. It's making the adjustment from child to adult through adolescence is rocky, and it's not easy. It's hard to make it through adolescence. And developing strong feelings of attachment for people who are the same sex, but who are not family. It's not mom, it's not dad, not sister or brother, is a way of learning to connect with people that we're not related to. And it's a way to navigate the whitewater between childhood and adulthood. Okay, the third lie is, since you were born that way, you can't change. The vast number of people, if we asked them, how many people believe that people are born gay? Most people's hands would go up. And if you said, why? Why do you believe that? Where did you get that? They go, everybody knows it. Well, this is an example of if you repeat a lie loud enough and long enough, people are going to believe that it's true. But it's not true. As a matter of fact, there's no scientific evidence of a genetic cause for homosexuality. No one is born gay any more than someone is born an English speaker. It's like, that's all I've ever known. I was born this way. No, you were born to be a speaker. You were born to talk because you're a human being. But if you're born in the United States, you're probably going to be an English speaker because of where you grew up. But there is no genetic evidence. There's no gay gene. They have mapped the human genome. There is no gay gene. As a matter of fact, what I think is the slam dunk evidence is the twin studies. If you have an identical twin, what does that say about your DNA?
It's very similar.
How similar?
Is it identical?
What?
I mean, is it identical?
They're identical because you have one egg that is the sperm connects with the egg and the DNA starts replicating, and then early in that baby's life, the egg splits into two, and they're two completely identical eggs now become two completely identical babies. Mm-hmm.
So like, would the babies be like smaller since they like split?
Great question. Not necessarily, although it's very unusual to have twins that are really, really big, like 12 pounds each or whatever. I don't know that I've ever heard of that. But I've seen twins and triplets that end up being very tall people, because their genes are the same. They're just really crowded, and often moms give birth a little bit early because the babies are so big. But here's the thing, since identical twins have the exact same genetic makeup, if one is gay, if it is true that they were born that way, then the other one would also always be gay, in the same way that identical twins have the same eye color, they have the same hair color, they look alike because they're copies of each other. If it was true that this was a genetic issue, there would be no such thing as identical twins where one is gay and the other is not. There would be 100% correspondence. It's more like 11. So people are not born gay. And it's also not true that you can't change. Thousands of people report significant change in their same-sex attractions. Some of them, probably the majority of them, because of things that set you up for weakness toward attraction toward the opposite sex, may still always be tempted to go down that path mentally and emotionally if they're stressed, but they also can develop attractions to the opposite sex, or even just one person. That happens a lot too. And they have to say no to their temptation to make a connection with the same sex, but it's fluid. Sexuality can be fluid, and the reason you don't hear about it is because people aren't telling their stories. And that's why at Living Hope we tell people, please tell your story. Let people know that like the church in Corinth in the first century, there were former homosexuals in that church, because change is possible. 1 Corinthians 6:11, Paul is walking through a list of people who had besetting sins, things that just grabbed them and beat them up. And there's two different forms of the word for homosexuals in that list. And he says, and such were some of you, past tense, but you were justified, you were sanctified, you were you were washed, you were sanctified, and you were justified by the Lord Jesus Christ. There were former homosexuals in the Church of Corinth. There are former homosexuals today as well. So this idea that you can't change is totally a lie. That's the kind of lie that I'm wanting you to look for in the Total Truth book as you read that and you write your paper. So how do we show grace to strugglers? First of all, no one chooses to have same-sex desires. This is something that is discovered rather than chosen. By the way, most people, when they discover it, they're horrified by it because they know it's not natural, they know it's not normal, and it's not like everybody else that they're surrounded with. And so Christians often pray, God, take this away. And he doesn't, because he has a plan for using this for our good and his glory. Having crushes and strong feelings is part of adolescence. It doesn't mean that someone is gay. It means we make it through and realize I really have a desire to have a strong connection with this person, but it doesn't have to become sexual. It doesn't mean one is gay. It means one is growing up. Be compassionate. You don't know who struggles or who loves someone who does. It could be a good friend, could be a family member. That's why it's so important not to call names or bully people or say anything that's hurtful or harmful. I'm pleading with you, please be respectful and just pre-decide no name calling. It's completely unloving to call someone ugly names. I can tell you, Dr. Bohlin and I have been married for 51 years, and we have never once called each other a name. That was pre-decided that we were not going to be sarcastic and we're not going to be unkind. So we've never called each other names. If you never get in the habit, it's real easy to not get into the habit of name calling, but pre-decide you're not going to do that. I want to encourage you as believers to include people who are on the fringes of groups, those that I have here, be alert to those who are feeling invisible. Because some people are wondering, can anybody see that I'm here? Because nobody's looking at me, nobody's acknowledging that I'm here. Find those people and bring them in. Everybody needs to feel included. Make everyone feel like you are one of the guys, you are one of the girls. That's the thing that I've seen over and over again, like I said, in over 20 years at Living Hope. People come in looking for help and they are so excited to meet with other people who understand what it's like to be them, because their whole life they felt like, I don't belong. I'm not one of the girls, I'm not one of the boys, I'm on the outside looking in, and it really, really hurts. My friend who was the lesbian activist for 25 years, she was the one that asked, is it the most loving thing to allow people to believe it's okay to be gay or trans, which we'll talk about more in a few months? God says it's not okay, it's not his intention. And there are all kinds of negative consequences to people believing a lie that they are gay or lesbian or trans. Please remember the role of spiritual warfare. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He is so good at hurting people through the lies of the whole LGBT alphabet brigade. The enemy's native tongue is lying, and he's lying to people that you're not okay. You're not a good enough guy. You're not a good enough girl. There's something drastically wrong with you. He lies and he hurts people. And finally, people who experience same-sex attraction or a transgender identity are wounded and deceived. Wounding from unmet needs, wounding from being bullied, wounded from not fitting in, and they're also deceived because the enemy is lying to them. Now, this is who you are. You were born this way, and Jesus loves them. And as Jesus people, we have the opportunity to be loving as well.